Article 7. Ratification. Signed in Convention September 17th, 1787. Ratified June 21st, 1788. Text. The ratification of the conventions of 9 states shall be sufficient for the establishment of this Constitution between the states, so ratifying the same. Interpretation. Article 7. Common interpretation by Mark A. Gramber and Michael B. Rampaport. One might think we draw the short straw. Most essays face the challenge of describing in 1,000 words interpretive debates about provisions of continuing importance, such as the First Amendment or Article 2. Our challenge, it might be thought, is to find 1,000 words to write about a provision that has its principal effect at the time of the Constitution and generated no interpretive controversy even at that time. The text of Article 7 declares that the Constitution shall become the official law of the ratifying states when 9 states ratify the document. When New Hampshire became the 9th state ratified on June 21st, 1788, the Constitution became good law. End of story. But actually, there are a surprisingly large number of things to say about Article 7. The controversies over Article 7 that occurred during the ratification process were over the substance of the mandated ratification process, not over what the text actually mandated. Anti-Federalists and the Federalists agreed on the meaning of ratification. 9 of the states, Vermont did not count as a state, much to the distress of Vermonters who declared independence in 1777, but were not represented in the Continental Congress under the Articles of Confederation. The main dispute between anti-Federalists and the Federalists was whether the new Constitution could lawfully be ratified by 9 states. Anti-Federalists pointed out that Article 7 was inconsistent with Article 8 of the Articles of Confederation, which required that the changes in constitutional arrangement be agreed to in the Congress of the United States and be afterwards confirmed by the legislatures of every state. Article 7 required agreement by only 9 states, cut out the Continental Congress completely, and substituted state conventions for state legislatures. As such, critics complained the process of ratifying the Constitution was illegal. Federalists responded in a variety of ways. Some Federalists argued that the Constitution ratification process was legal because the articles were the treaty between the states that was no longer binding because of repeated violations. Other Federalists argued that the sovereign people were free to decide to abandon any feature of a field constitution, even provisions for constitutional change. James Madison in the Federalist number 40 declared, in all great changes of established governments, forms ought to give way to substance. That the rigid adherence in such cases to the former would render nominal and nugatory the transcendent and the precious right of the people to abolish or alter their governments as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. The framers' decision to substitute the convention for state legislatures reflected both principal and pragmatic concerns. The decision was in part based on the principle that the Constitution should be an act of the people rather than the legislature. In particular, if the Constitution was to take a priority over legislative decisions, it has derived from a different source. Yet, the decision to employ the people did not take the modern form of a popular vote by referendum, but instead of a special convention elected by the people. In this area, as with the federal legislation and constitutional amendments, the Constitution employs representational democracy rather than direct democracy. The use of state legislatures also reflected pragmatic concerns. The proposed Constitution would take power away from the state legislatures, which generated the fear that those legislatures might delay or defeat ratification of the Constitution. The framers' decision to depart from the unanimity requirement of the Articles was also important. One of the biggest defects of the Articles was the difficulty the nation had in securing amendments, with a single state often blocking them. The Constitution chose instead to require ratification by 9 of the 13 states, which ensured a consensus, but without allowing a small number of states, Rhode Island in particular, to block the new Constitution. Article 7 came to be viewed as having important implications for federalism and secession. Chief Justice Marshall in McCulloch versus Maryland, 1819, argued that the Article 7's requirement that the Constitution be ratified by the people in convention showed that it was not a compact between the states, but an emanation of the people as a whole. The conventions occurred at the state level, according to Marshall, merely because of historical practice and convenience. By contrast, Confederate states interpreted Article 7 differently. They viewed each state's ratification as a decision by the state, acting through its sovereign people. When these states attempted to secede, they often did so by having a convention adopted a provision repealing the prior ratification of the Constitution under Article 7. Thus, these states viewed the Article 7 ratification as an act for the people of the state that could be repealed. The essays that follow draw different lessons from Article 7. Professor Michael Rappaport argued that Article 7 greatly contributed to the desirability of the Constitution. The supermajority rule for ratification, Article 7, promoted a Constitution that was supported by a consensus of the country, and that included protections against the majority, including a Bill of Rights and constitutional federalism. Professor Michael Gramber believes Article 7 was a part of a political program that prevented Americans from voting on whether constitutional structures, powers, and rights were particularly desirable. Fear of being left out, the revised United States fuels crucial ratification rather than the merits of the Constitution. Matters of debate. The first perspective, why 9 means 13 by Mark E. Graber. The point 9 was to get a 13. Article 7 may declare that the Constitution of the United States was the law of the land when ratified by 9 states. Both the framers and text clearly anticipated a union of all 13 states. 9 encouraged early ratification while preventing hold out states from extracting favorable concessions. The politics underlying Article 7 highlights the importance of thinking about how constitutions are supposed to work rather than worrying exclusively on what words meant at a particular time period. Article 7 literally promises a constitutional regime that the framers agreed was pernicious and destructive. The Federalist Number 6 declares, if these states should be only united in partial confederacies, the subdivisions into which they might be thrown would have frequent violent contests with each other. Nevertheless, Article 7 contemplates a constitutional regime that does not include Virginia, New York, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania, a polity bisected in two, with the southern states and New England states in, but Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania out, or two separate nations with either separate confederacy composed of Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, or one composed of Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. Article 7 aside, the Constitution contemplates being the Constitution for all 13 states. The preamble begins with the people of the United States and ends to do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. The phrase United States of America is taken directly from Article 1 of the Articles of Confederation, which declares the style of this confederacy shall be the United States of America. The people of the United States in the preamble thus referred to the people for all 13 states, thus the people of the states that ratified the Constitution. Consider the resulting paradoxes and some states not ratified under Article 1 of the Confederation. Non-ratified states remain part of a confederacy called the United States. Under Article 7 of the Constitution, only ratified states compose the United States. Will the real United States please stand up? Article 7 declares that the Constitution becomes the official law of the land when ratified by 9 states. How did this impact Massachusetts, New York, North Carolina, and Rhode Island? The moment New Hampshire ratified on June 21st, 1788. With these unattached states that did not require congressional permission to join the Union and could not be discriminated against under Article 1, Section 9, were they nations that required congressional permission to join the Union and could be discriminated against under Article 1, Section 9? When did unattached states become a separate nation or separate nations? The Constitution does not say, and the point was not debated at length. The framer did not confront these paradoxes because they never contemplated union with less than the original 13 states. Madison defended the logic of requiring 9 states for ratification by laying out the consequences if only 12 states ratified. The Federalist Number 40 declares the 9 state requirement for ratification proceeded from an irresistible conviction of the absurdity of subjecting the fate of 12 states to the perverseness or corruption of the 13th Rhode Island. Neither Madison or any other Federalist defended the merits of a 9-state union, which the Federalist paper claimed would result in an unmitigated disaster. The 9-state requirement of Article 7 promoted unanimous state ratification in 2 ways. States that ratified early got in on the ground floor for making any crucial alterations to the Constitution's Bill of Rights, and filling in vital constitutional details. The measure establishes the cabinet and the federal judiciary. States that held out could not extort better terms. Given the recognized need to be in the Union, Article 7 practically guaranteed a process increasing returns in which the ratification of each additional state increased the odds that every remaining state would ratify. The framing politics of Article 7 worked. Most state ratification debates turn on delegates' recognition that for reasons stated in the Federalist numbers 3 to 8, their state could not afford to be one of the states initially left out, should the Constitution be ratified by at least 9 states. Such concern influenced ratifying conventions in all small states in Georgia, which needed national defense against Native American tribes in all state ratifying conventions that took place after momentum had clearly swung towards constitutional ratification. Virginia, New Hampshire, New York, Massachusetts, North Carolina, Rhode Island. Crucial votes to ratifying all these conventions were provided by delegates who, after expressing serious reservations about the Constitution, concluded that the best way to change the Constitution was to work from within, and then remaining outside the Constitution for any period of time was not a viable option. Article 7 was a part of political program that guaranteed that Americans from 1787 to 1789 would not have the opportunity to vote on whether the constitutional schemes for structuring the national government, allocating power, and protecting rights were particularly desirable. As historian Jack Rolkoff of Stanford University points out, state conventions voted on the Constitution as a whole, not on any particular provision. By early 1788, state conventions were not even voting on the relative merits of the Constitution and the Articles of Confederation. Once the Constitution acquired some momentum in early state voting, the choice Article 7 imposed on most states was to ratify the Constitution immediately or at a later date under less favorable circumstances. Given these alternatives, Americans accepted the institutional arrangements, powers, and rights the Constitution enumerated. Given the same choices, they probably would have accepted the institutional arrangements, powers, and rights enumerated in the constitutions for Canada, Mexico, Chile, France, Bulgaria, Mali, Japan, and any other nation whose constitution does not establish a non-Christian religious theocracy. The next perspective, Article 7 and the Desirability of the Constitution by Michael B. Rumpaport. Article 7 is a largely forgotten constitutional provision, but it should not be, since it was a key to both constitutional enactment into law and its desirability. Article 7 is a provision and specifies conditions for the Constitution to become law. The document that was produced by the Philadelphia Convention was merely a proposal. It only became law when the conditions required by Article 7 ratification by 9 of the 13 states acting through conventions were satisfied. Article 7 also indicated the legal standard for non-ratifying states. The article provides that such non-ratified states were not bound by the Constitution, and it seems clear that they would have been treated as legally independent countries. Given Article 7's central role concerning these legal effects, we might call it the legal force clause. Article 7 also has significant consequences for the Constitution's desirability. The article imposed a strict supermajority rule of 9 of the 13 states for ratification. This requirement is important because there are strong reasons to believe that the strict supermajority rules for a constitutional enactment, the amendment, are likely to produce a desirable constitution. See John O. McGinnis and Michael B. Rappaport, Originalism and the Good Constitution. One beneficial feature of such supermajority rules is that they promote consensus support for the Constitution. If a significant portion of the country strongly oppose the Constitution, which can easily happen under a majority enactment law, then it is unlikely to bind the nation together and may produce continuing discord. By contrast, if Constitution passes under strict supermajority rule, the opposition is likely to be limited, and the Constitution can serve as a source of allegiance. Another beneficial feature of strict supermajority rules is that they promote better decision-making. If a constitution can only be amended through a strict supermajority rule, as with the U.S. Constitution, then constitutional provisions should last a long time. Consequently, it will often be difficult to predict how they will operate on people in the future. This means that the provision will be enacted behind limited veil of ignorance, which will lead people to focus on the public interest rather than their narrow advantage. For example, if it is not clear which party will control the presidency in the future, it makes sense to decide which powers the president should possess based not on whether one predicts one's party will control the office, but on what prudential powers will promote the public interest. Similarly, because it will often, but not always, as in the case of race, be unclear which party or group will be in the majority, there will be a strong incentive to include protections for minorities and individual rights. These benefits of supermajority rules were not merely theoretical. The supermajority requirements for enacting the Constitution was likely the cause of some of its most desirable provisions. If a mere majority of the states could have enacted the Constitution, it's quite possible that the document would not have provided for a strong constitutional federalism. When the Constitution was being written in Philadelphia, the drafter knew that it would need to secure a significant supermajority. While the majority states, especially the big states, might have supported a constitution that provided states with a limited role, the convention was forced to include significant constitutional protections for states because of the need to secure ratification by a supermajority of states. The Bill of Rights is also probably the result of the supermajority requirement. When the constitutional ratification was being debated, there seemed to be insufficient support to secure ratification in the 9 required states. The Federalists were therefore forced to abandon the opposition to the Bill of Rights and to promise that the new government will enact such a bill once it was established. If the Constitution could have been rectified with a mere majority of the states, it's very possible that the Federalists could have avoided making that promise. Thus, the Bill of Rights was also likely the result of the supermajority requirements of Article 7. It might be argued that the Constitution was a result of majority rule because each state's convention ratified using a majority voting rule. But the fact that each state ratified by majority vote does not mean that the constitutional enactment process as a whole should be understood as a majoritarian. The one aspect of a voting process is majoritarian does not mean that it's majoritarian overall. For example, both representatives and senators are elected by majority vote, but that does not mean that it's a purposing of a constitutional amendment by 2/3 vote in each house is a majoritarian. We normally assume that a supermajoritarian voting rule and one level makes the enactment process supermajoritarian. If a mere 7 states were required to ratify the Constitution, that would have been majoritarian. The 9-state requirement was a supermajoritarian. In sum, there are strong arguments for concluding that the supermajoritarian enactment process was an essential ingredient for producing a desirable constitution. While today we greatly value our constitution, it's easy to overlook that part of the reason for its excellency was the supermajority requirement written to Article 7.